for a public hearing for September 27th, 2016. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Public hearing notice pursuant to Resolution 135-16 dated 9/12/16, the Shandaken Town Board has scheduled a public hearing for adoption of flood ordinances, maps, and insurance study provided by FEMA to be held on Tuesday, September 27, 2016 at 6:30 p.m. to hear all those in favor or against of said adoption of the firms and accessory items at Shandaken Town Hall, 7209 Route 28 Shandaken, by order of the Shandaken Town Board.
Thank you. Have a roll call.
Board Member Alba, Board Member DeStefani,
Here.
Board Member Malloy,
Here.
Board Member Storm,
Here.
Supervisor Sam.
Here. So obviously tonight we are here for review of the flood maps. We're due to adopt these by October 18th, so we can send them over to FEMA and the New York State DEC for review for completeness. And once we've adopted, we have to have a finalized adoption date of November 18th, 2016, or FEMA cancels the flood insurance for every property owner townwide. We've reviewed the maps over the past several years. It's been going on since 2008, 2009 approximately it started. The firm that was hired to do the mapping started doing the mapping. Irene hit, they had to remap several areas of the town. They did revise those. We've had our safari meetings. We've reviewed the maps panel by panel. We have had success in arguing several areas of the panel, different panels. Two in particular, one is Shandaken Hamlet and one is the Phoenicia Hamlet, where we were able to argue correctly to have approximately 40 homes in each panel removed from the panel. So aside from that, we also have a local ordinance. Now the ordinance is similar to what we had previously. There are some minor adjustments because the state has become more stringent over a period of time. One of the things they're going to repeat in here is that we have 2 foot of freeboard, meaning that if based on your base flood elevation, they require any new structure or substantial improvement for a structure be done where the base floor is 2 foot minimum above that base flood elevation, and that can be certified by a surveyor through an elevation certificate. It's going to affect a number of parcels throughout the town. I think there's about 400 parcels that will be entering into the floodplain because generally there was a lot of areas in the town that were never mapped before. The mapping from 1987 till now has changed dramatically. The mapping system before was basically ground surveys. Currently, the way they're doing it now is called LIDAR, or light detected radar, which reads the degree of topography in the area to see flow rates, and depth charts can be generated from this to show you what the depth of the water is. Now the floodplain, even though you're in the floodplain, it doesn't necessarily mean you are going to be, excuse the term, but blown up by a flood. The floodplain can extend to areas where it can be up to 1 foot of depth or even a half a foot of depth of water, but it's just showing the spread of the water and what the flow would be. Then you're going to hear terms about the floodway, which is the concentrated area of the flow of a 100-year flood. Again, we know we went through Irene, and there's a number of people that did not get flooded during Irene, but recognize that Irene in this area was really only what they considered a 75-year flood. And once you get into tributaries, then you have things like the Stony Clove is only considered, I believe, a 60-year, 50 or 60-year flood. Bushnellsville, Beaverkill, all those streams were similar in their capacity. They weren't much close. They were about halfway where they would be for a 100-year flood. So FEMA bases all its rates and all its maps on the 100-year flood elevation on each channel of the stream. With that, the flood ordinance, we've added a few other things to the flood ordinance. Now we're going to consider a cumulative flood damage prevention. So over the building department is going to track building improvements over a 10-year period, a floating 10-year period. So if you are considering doing an addition on your home, adding to the home, whatever it may be, or doing an improvement even, the cost based on that first construction date If over the next 10 years you do additions or other alterations which go to exceed 50% of the market value from that original construction date, you will be required to bring the entire structure up to the current levels and to the current code. So this is going to be a little bit of work for the building department, but in this day and age with digital mapping and everything, we can follow it fairly easily, we hope. The other one that is in there is also critical facilities. We're going to require that critical facilities such as town halls, firehouses, ambulance buildings, anything as such, be located outside of the 500-year floodplain, so as to ensure that they will never be inundated by any kind of flood. We would hope. We hope we never get the 1,000-year flood, whenever that may come. We hope we never see that. The last and final is a repetitive loss clause, where if you sustain repetitive losses during a flood where they accumulate over a 10-year period to 50% of the cost of the structure, you again will be required to bring that entire structure up to current code. Meaning you would have to meet the 2 foot of freeboard and whatever else, again, to ensure the resiliency of those buildings and those parcels to maintain them on the tax base. All these additional regulations that we're imposing or looking to impose are going to help us with what's called the Community Rating System, or CRS. CRS is a application that the town is going to make in order to help reduce flood rates town-wide. Based on your scoring, and from what we know from being certified floodplain managers, just based on the state level, we can get what's called, it's based on a level from 10 to 1, 1 being the best. Generally, anybody in the state can apply right now and say that they are at an 8, but with these additional, which would give you a 5% reduction in your flood insurance rates. If we go to the extent of what we're proposing here, plus additional work that we've done, especially since Irene, being notifying the public, constantly handing out information concerning flooding, what to do during floods, flood preparedness, all these things, they count towards more points, and we feel that we might have a strong application to get us near a 6, which would bring us to within 15 or 20% reduction for the flood insurance rates town-wide again. So everybody knows that flood insurance has been going up continuously and dramatically over the past few years. We're trying to work to try to minimize that as best we can, and this is the best way we can do it.
And what is it? It's 5% every 500 points, right? If we accumulate 500 points on each one.
It's like 15, I think it's 1,500 points or something along those lines. Aaron, you might.
I'm not sure if there's points, how much it is, but from if you're a 10, there's no reduction. If you're a 9, it's 5%, 8 is 10%, 7, 15. But I'm not sure there's a set number of.
Yeah, I think the most reduction you can get is like a 40%. You can get near 50. There's one town in the entire United States out in California, which has a #1 rating, and it's a lot of work from what we hear from the people that do. We know actually it was Tetra Tech that was assisting us during Irene with our flood prevention plan.
What are we now?
Right now, we are
Yes.
nothing. We are not registered with CRS.
Oh, we're not registered. Okay.
And that's what we're trying to do again. Coming up on Monday, I'll have a resolution to apply for SMIP funding or a grant through the Ashokan Watershed Stream Management Program to hire a consultant to help Warren in the application, the initial application for CRS. Hopefully it'll go through. I don't see why we have any problems. And actually, one of our closest neighbors, Middletown, with Village of Fleischman's and Village of Margaretville, applied just under the standard that they have, and they received a rating of an 8, and they get a 5% reduction on their flood insurance rates. That's what I'm told by the mayor.
So can we do things to make us better to get that CRS?
Well, again, by enacting this law with the additional language in it for the not compensatory, but cumulative damage, repetitive loss, and critical facilities, I think each of those adds approximately 500 points to our scoring system.
But it's like the town hall and the garage. Is that like a problem this now because of where we sit in the floodway?
No, it's not based on where your structures are located,
away from us.
But having the law in there where we're going to relocate critical facilities and where we're actually contemplating moving the town complex, that's outside of the 500 years, so that would work for us and within the law.
Would be able to move the buildings, the retail realty buildings, would that add to our score?
No, I don't believe so.
No? Okay.
No, it's really about information, getting information out to the public and letting them know and how to be aware of what to do, how to handle during floods, and maintaining that information. Again, Joyce has been very good about sending out, even those simple little cards that everybody sees around at the gas station, those can help us accrue points.
And we could do another bulk mailing like we did. It wouldn't
Yeah.
hurt.
Right.
And the bridges,
Yeah, like we did
does
once
that have
on the
any
bridge.
bearing on it at all? The improvement on the height being raised on the bridge, no?
I think there's points for all kinds of different things. One is like maintaining ditch lines and things like that for stormwater, not so much riverine, but stormwater, like ponding and things. But yeah, I mean, there's so many for,
Yeah, the bridge thing falls under infrastructure, and Eric and I, we've talked about this at safari meetings. There may be points, if the town adopted a plan where we said that we would mandate that any future bridge replacement be done to the 100-year flood. And I'm doing a lot of talking, so I'll let Eric go from there because he can explain more in detail why that's an issue. If we were to put in a plan in place where all the bridges, when you go to replace, have to meet the 100-year flood standard. You want to take that for a minute?
No, we have two bridges now that are flagged that have to be replaced. The first bridge is Beck Hollow and the bridge on Church Street. If we had adopted that plan, both of those bridges would have to be built to a 100-year flood spec. The cost is much higher than what the in-kind replacement is there now. So if we have a flood event and if we have that standard adopted, FEMA pays us to upgrade all the structures that are damaged to a 100-year flood and no questions asked. This time it was a whole battle and appeal process. It took 5 years to get the same happen. But if there's no designated event or disaster, we're responsible for bringing them up to a 100-year flood standard on our own. And they get quite expensive. We could add $250,000 to the price of a bridge repair.
Yeah, so it's kind of cost prohibitive for us to look at that, especially with all the smaller hollows that we have that really service maybe a few homes at a time. So we felt that it wasn't necessary to look at doing the minimum of 100-year flood elevation. We'll try to build them as resilient as we can, but that was a corridor we didn't want to go down.
can I just clarify one? So Tim had asked about the CRS points. I just pulled it up. So starting at 10, 0 to 500, 499 points is you get 10 just to be in the program. There's no reduction. But then, the next 500, so it's 500 points each tier, not 1,500.
Right.
And then it goes every 5%. So if Middletown or if we're in an 8, that's 10% off if you're in the special flood hazard area, and it's 5% reduction if you have flood insurance and you're not, even though you're not.
Oh, if you have the flood, yeah.
Yeah. So if Shandaken came in as a 7, you have to get 1,500 points, 1,500 points, and it'd be 15% off. Policyholders townwide.
Yeah.
And then 5% off if you're not in the floodplain and you carry flood insurance.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the email right now.
Karen, is there a list, like, is there online or whatever, of ways that you accumulate points?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we just down at the Shandaken Watershed Streets Program office, there's a whole manual on it. We have copies. I can send you copies. It's online.
Oh,
I have upstairs.
You have it.
I have the CRS name.
But yeah, I mean, you can accumulate points pretty quickly. Most of it, as Rob said, is for education, but just even things you wouldn't even, think about if you look in there.
and who do you have to prove that you are doing this stuff too?
So that goes through it's a FEMA program, but it's through the state, I believe, right?
Yes.
Through the
Does he
state
have to do the
floodplain
CAD
act.
visit?
Yeah,
So we go through the DEC.
yeah.
I'm trying to find, again, I had it somewhere where I originally circulated the information. I'm trying to find the email right now. To say I think it's 500 points for each one of the things that we're doing
Yeah.
by themselves, just enacting each as
Right.
well as brings us up to 1,500 points.
Yeah, and the town has its own flood hazard mitigation plan, which it updates annually, so, Shandaken can rack up points pretty quick.
And you know, again, thinking about it, that's what Margaret, they have the flood mitigation plan, that's what accrued them the additional points through the CRS to get them to the 8 instead of the 9, which would be a state standard. I know we're packing them in, we got plenty of time, we can answer whatever questions anybody has. We've been, again, as I said, we've been reviewing these maps and flood insurance studies, the fact that myself, Warren, Eric, Aaron, Don Brewer, the head of the chair of the planning department, have all been certified as floodplain managers, which is not an easy task. We know a couple of individuals that have taken a few times to pass the exam, but it's a lot of information, and I'm glad that we've got, again, I'm going to say that we're the highest per capita certified floodplain managers, probably if not in the state, but maybe even in the nation, considering we've got 4 of them working within, 4 or 5 working within the town of Shandaken.
You know, I mean, I'll just add from sort of the Ulster County's perspective, there are no CRS communities in Ulster County. And when you look at the floodplains and the damages, Shandaken is ahead of the town of Ulster, which, you know, is hard, and it's hard to imagine that, you know, a community with so many people, so many buildings, such big floodplains, like the lower Sophus Creek and the Rondout. But yeah, Shandaken, when, as you know, when we get hit hard.
Yeah.
And it's expensive. So, yeah.
Okay, now what?
Just if there's any other comments. Again, what I'm looking at is we're probably, Monday's meeting, we're looking at probably doing we have to do a seeker, we have to do the environmental quality review because we're enacting a law, and then we'll do a resolution for adoption. Then it gets sent over to DEC and FEMA for a final review. Once they send back that everything is okay, it becomes law at that point. It's dissimilar from other laws where we do it and we send it to the Secretary of State, Department of State, and once they get it and they stamp it, they send a letter to Joyce and say it's legal. This has to go through a little bit more of a review process to make sure we did everything correctly. So,
They reimburse us at all for doing this, or we have, it's all the bills on us?
nope, and they increase your flood insurance. So ultimately, you pay for it.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions, concerns?
You gonna read it?
We can talk to you about rate increases are not going to stop anytime soon. This is the Bigger Waters Act, 2013. which makes up-
Grim water, something.
Yeah, it was Grim Waters, then you had
Bigger was first.
Bigger was first, Bigger Waters, then Grim Waters,
But basically,
which is a funny name for a sponsorship of a bill about flooding, Grim Waters.
I mean, as I understand it, it's effective starting this past April 1st. Any of these pre-firm structures, so houses that were built before the town had flood maps, which the majority of them in Shandaken were. For second homes, businesses, those increases are going to go 25% a year for the first 4 years until actuarial rates are reached.
Right.
So that's a lot. Residences, it's going to go, your average increase is somewhere, I think they said it's it could be as much as 18%, but probably most everybody will be 5 to 8% again until actuarial rates.
Now, I know through New York Rising that we had put in for monies for elevation certificates to hopefully be done for people who need to know what their elevation is in order to know what their exact flood insurance should be.
Yeah, so we didn't put in for elevation certificates. You can't do that because you would be giving an advantage to one homeowner over another. What the application was for, we haven't moved forward in that application yet. Again, New York Rising has their own timelines of how they go through and
Yes,
plod through
I
the
know
whole
that.
thing. So what we did is we applied for monuments, elevation monuments to be placed. That would be, basically the monuments are the markers, if you will, the set markers to establish a base elevation to which elevation certificates are derived from. So for instance, in Chichester, let's say, a surveyor, if the closest marker is, there's one actually at the corner of Bridge Street, there's a little circle on the ground there that tells you the exact elevation from sea level. So the surveyor would take that mark and then plod down the road with all their surveying equipment until they got to whatever property they were at. The length of time and amount of effort it takes to get that elevation set at that property is going to base what their elevation certificate is going to be. So obviously, the farther the marker from the home, the more expensive it is. Our application was to provide more elevation monuments throughout the town that would benefit more of the community. So then you could place other elevation monuments would help cheapen the cost of getting elevation
Yeah.
certificates. It wouldn't be so
Yeah,
far.
it's very expensive.
And quite honestly, we've seen it before. Again, I think Brent was more involved in the one down here. We had somebody, I'm not gonna name, but they had misplaced by the tens, they had misplaced an elevation. We're looking at the map and they said, they're gonna have to raise like 18 feet more. 18, we're going, no, there's no way. So, yeah.
Also potential to increase the accuracy.
Yeah.
Because you talk to a surveyor, if he's got a marker here, he's got to go a mile down the road to get his elevation. How many times does he have to plot? You know, so not only does it cut down on the time, but it increases the accuracy. That helps everybody.
Yeah. No, it's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah, again, and a lot of it goes back to the mapping. I can tell you, for instance, Aaron lives up in Oliveria. He's well aware that a lot of Oliveria was not mapped before. There was nothing. It was just basically the stream channel. Now it's fully mapped almost all the way, I think, just beyond the full moon.
That's right.
And McKinley Hollow is mapped now, which
Hollow.
McKinley Hollow suffered severe amount of damage during Irene.
Yeah.
And
For
again,
sure.
it wasn't the 100-year flood, but
Yeah.
and to try to derive those elevations, again, Warren now being a CFM and seeing these buildings going up next to these small tributaries, you know, trying to figure out what they call the HAG or the lag, and, you know, lowest adjacent grade, highest adjacent grade, all these computations that they make you do is ridiculous. Whereas if you have base flood elevation definitively, you just get an elevation certificate and it's done, and you know.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense.
So, long story short, do we have money coming for those monuments? Or do we,
That's
do
gonna
we
be
know,
through the New
or
York
we're
Rise.
not sure? We're not sure.
It's up through the New York Rise program.
Yeah.
Depends on where they go with whatever project is next on their list. When they
Right,
come to us and say,
exactly.
we'd like to do this one next.
It's always a surprise for us, isn't it?
So right now, the monuments are on bridges? generally?
No, they're located throughout the town and basically at intersections. You can go, what is it?
There's one back here on Station Road.
Yeah, there's it's NAVD, NAGD, US Geological Survey. I guess you can go to those and you'll see them if you look at the geological survey maps. You'll see an X. Even on these, if you look on the flood maps, they'll have a little X that shows where the monuments are, so you can try to figure out where those locations are to show. I'm going to tell you generally what we're hearing for average cost of an elevation certificate is $600 to $800. But if you go further, obviously that cost is going to increase depending on the distance from the elevation.
Yeah, you gotta get more than.
I know Eric, again, he's a perfect case in point with his building in Phoenicia where he's looking at filling in his basement, getting an elevation certificate, which he knows is gonna reduce his flood insurance drastically, probably. Again, he's got a basement, he's gotta move the equipment out of the basement, fill it in, put it into grade, put flood fence in, get the elevation. So it's gonna cost maybe, I don't know what, or maybe $2,000 or $3,000 to do all this work, but ultimately it'll end up saving you a few $1,000s a year.
Yeah, we moved everything out of the basement, first of all, 20-some years ago, it was a flood. But the problem is, FEMA still bases our flood elevation on the basement floor, which isn't used, hasn't been used in 20 years, so why have a basement?
Right.
If I fill it in just to a crawl space, then, then my elevation's based on the first floor of the building, not the basement.
Right,
So, it's worth filling in the basement.
It makes sense, yeah.
yeah. And you put those floodgates in and then you,
You put
yeah.
flood fence in there.
Yeah.
So these are things that people are gonna have to consider over the next few years, and really as a cost saving, again, I know I've talked to a few people that were looking at homes, considering buying a home, or had just recently purchased a home, and explained to them, you know, if it costs you $5,000 and you're paying $7,000, $6,000 a year in flood insurance, you're gonna get the return almost immediately within the next 2 or 3 years. It just makes sense, and it makes you more resilient too. You don't have to worry about losing stuff during the storm and so on.
Especially if it's in these rules.
Again, the flood insurance is only required by federally backed mortgages within the floodplain. We are hearing from banks so your flood insurance only covers your structure. We are hearing at the state managers conference that some banks are just being insistent, even if the floodplain is touching the property but may not be touching the structure, they can insist that you have the flood insurance rate. Your option at that point is to either seek another banker or to just buy in and get the flood insurance, and generally you're gonna get, if you get an elevation certificate to prove it's not touching the structure, you'll get what's called a preferred rate, and it'll be a base rate, probably a couple $100 a year, but it's worth it. The other concern, I spoke to somebody who said that they were moved out, and this was in another township. They were moved out of the floodplain with the new flood maps, so they decided to cancel their flood insurance. I said, you never know. Everybody's seen it, especially with Irene. I mean, Fox Hollow, what'd that jump, a quarter mile? Yeah, it jumped the bank a quarter mile and went right straight through the home. So that's a case in point. You never know what the stream's gonna do or what the environment's gonna do. So for a couple $100 a year to have that security, it just makes sense to just keep it and hold on to it, and just in case.
Just the changes, the large changes in the map, so for folks in town, you know, the newly mapped areas are like the Bushnellsville, which wasn't mapped at all, the Oliver Reed area, the Lower Birch Creek, that road in there, Silver Hollow, and like the Panther Kill. So those are like the newly mapped, where there was no